Okay. President-elect Blake, Rotarians, can you hear me okay now? Is this better? And guests, Jim, Ben, Richard, and those of you that have heard me before, thanks for coming again. A little over 15 years ago, which puts us back in the year 2003, our club president, Sam Fowler, called and asked if I would help plan something to celebrate the 90th anniversary of our charter date, which would be in November of that year. Is this coming okay? Am I close enough? Okay. We were well on our way in the planning of that event when our newspaper publisher, Larry Corby, came in as president. And a few weeks before the event that we were to have, he asked if I would give a short history talk at that dinner meeting, telling about some of the things, how maybe our club got started and some of the things the early members did, and if I had time maybe to talk about some of the significant things that we did in my early years in the Rotary Club. We had a very nice banquet that evening at the Muskogee Country Club. There were about 200 people there, and they worked me in somewhere between the dessert and the speaker. A few years later, when Randy Minnie was president, I was asked to do it again and include more to fill in the time, maybe speak just a little bit slower, and it was to be recorded where part of it was put on a disc. I believe I've maybe done it twice since then, with the last time being here about 2 years ago. I mention this to acknowledge the fact that since I can't change the history of our club or past activities or come up with any better side to try to make a point of what I'm trying to get across, some of you people are lucky or unlucky enough to be hearing this for the third or fourth time. The other dilemma I had when I was preparing this outline to streamline and refresh it a little bit was not what to say, but what to leave out. We have so many past officers, project chairmen, and just dedicated good members here today that have done so much to bring us right up to where we are today. But in the interest of time and staying in the past, I may not mention you or your favorite project, but please know that your good work is making history now in your time, and your work is appreciated so much, especially in the hearts of those that you serve. And I do believe that someday there'll be another old man standing up before the club talking about things they did in the past years from now. And they'll say something like, well, we had a wine tasting party. We even sponsored a golf tournament, refed homeless people down at the Mission, and even met at that old railroad station on Elgin Street where the Music Hall of Fame used to be. Because you'll see in the next few minutes as I tell you about things in our past, some written somewhere and some just remembered, you will see that over time very little stays the same. Now, what we know about the Muskogee Rotary Club comes to us from an excerpt in a letter written by an early day Muskogee insurance agent. His name was Stanley Sheeler. I did not know Mr. Sheeler, but I did know his two sons. One of his sons was a classmate of mine through the school system in Muskogee. His grandson was Paul Stanley Sheeler, who was a good friend of my son Mark. But in this letter, Mr. Sheeler writes, "My attention was first called to Rotary in 1912 by a friend of mine who lived in New York City who was a member of that club. That was the 6th club to be chartered in 1909. Now, to find out more about it, I contacted a friend of mine in Oklahoma City who was a member of that club, which was number 29 to be chartered. He sent me the information I needed, and then I called 7 friends of mine together, and we did all that was necessary to become chartered as the Muskogee Rotary Club, November the 1st, 1913. We were the 87th club formed with 40 members. There are now over 34,000 clubs in something like 200 countries scattered around the world. When I became a member in 1953, one of the charter members was still a very active member of the club. His name was Tom Gaddy. I knew Mr. Gaddy real well because he and Mrs. Gaddy were good friends of my parents. One of the other significant things that these first members did was to get with some Tulsa friends the information they needed to get their Rotary Club chartered in April of 1915. At that time, Tulsa was merely a village compared to the growing Muskogee. The Tulsa Rotary Club now is the 7th largest Rotary Club in the world. Now, before I go further, I'd like to recognize two long friends going back to the 1950s with me here in Rotary that I've had the opportunity to work side by side with, flipping cakes, ringing Salvation Army bells in freezing weather, working garage sales, antique shows, among other things, for now over 50 years. They are Ken Meyer and Jack Barr, both past presidents. The three of us, with the dubious distinction of being the last of the World War II vets. Jack was also a past secretary and did a lot of work getting a very successful Tahlequah Club chartered. I'm curious, how many past presidents do we have here today? Would you all stand? Let's give them a hand. They're the workhorses. I would like to hear from every one of them someday on what they consider in the past and what they did their year. They could do it just like I'm doing today. Now, sad to say, but the clippings and the record of the many things that we did in the early years that were kept in a very large scrapbook that I saw many times, and so did Ken and Jack, disappeared after the death of one of our longtime secretaries about 40 years ago. At that time, our secretary kept the records of our past and things we did that he thought were significant in this large scrapbook, and they would bring it to our meetings and our social events for us to go through now and then. But after the funeral and death of a good friend of mine, our secretary, Ali Jamel, who was Mr. Rotarian through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, he died unexpectedly after a very short time in the hospital. I called on his brother after the funeral service at Ali's home, and I asked him about that scrapbook. He said he hadn't seen it, and I told him to be on the lookout for it. The trail ended right there. I still hope that someday, somewhere, somebody's going to find that in an attic or a basement somewhere, and we'll get it back. But we do know probably the most important historical event taken on by that club in the early days that caught the attention of the Rotary world was to have the largest district conference held at that time in Muskogee, River City, April 1922. It was attended by close to 5,000 Rotarians and their families. All of our hotels and motels were filled to capacity. Some of our members at that time took our guests in. Many came by train, and the newspaper reported that there were 100 railroad Pullman sleeping cars parked on the side tracks to house our guests. It was called Pullman City. When I became a member in 1953, we had 120 members. We met at the ballroom of the Seavers Hotel, which is now the Bank of Oklahoma. It was an all-male club. We sat at long tables, went the length of the ballroom with white tablecloths, and we were served by waitresses. We all dressed up in those days to come to meetings. We wore business suits, white shirts and ties and sport coats, Stetson felt hats in the winter and Stetson straw hats in the summer. There was a big hat rack at the entrance that was filled by the time we were seated. There was always an elevated head table at the head of the room where the president, the secretary, the program chairman, and the speaker always sat. Ashtrays were placed in front of every other plate, and most of us lit up our cigarettes, pipes, or cigars right after lunch. Before the program started, Charles Proctor, whose dad co-owned all the theaters in town, would hop up to the piano and we would all sing a bunch of rousing Rotary songs. It was not easy to be asked to be a Rotarian in those days because for so many years we adhered to a rather strict classification system in the selection and admission of members. There was only to be one from each business or profession, and they had to be the top person in that organization in Muskogee, the CEO or the president. It was a standard then hanging down from Rotary International Rules Committee, and we were required to send them a roster periodically to be sure that we were always in line. Other than a few young professionals and small business owners then, we were mostly a club of men in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, many nearing retirement, and the other civic club members disrespectfully referred to us as the old man's club. A strict classification system may have had some advantages in the beginning. The members did get acquainted with people out of their field a little bit better at the meetings. But in time, our numbers began falling, and our projects to help the many benevolent organizations that needed more funding, it really became a big plus to have more liberal admission requirements, to have the younger, energetic members join our ranks. Now, as long as we were an only male organization, we had a yearly banquet called Ladies' Night. Many of you will remember that. The women had an active auxiliary organization called Rotary Anns. This Ladies' Night was to honor our wives. The Club president planned and put it together, and in the early days, I can remember our wives wore long formal dresses and were presented corsages at the door. The other Civic Club presidents and their wives always attended and were always invited. For us, it was the social event of the year. The year I was president in 1957, we had it at our new Western Hills Lodge on Fort Gibson Lake, and we had about 100 in attendance. Also, in that year of 1957, the Rotary International meeting was held as close to Muskogee as it probably ever will be. It was in Dallas. I prevailed on the other officers, some of the directors, and some on the board to load up in a couple of cars, and what we experienced there gave us a big boost of Rotary indoctrination for that year. You know about the United Nations. I've been there, and some of you have too, but I think the Rotary International meeting has it beat in the understanding and development with friendships on a one-to-one basis with people from other countries. The part that I enjoyed the most at that meeting was called the vocational and professional meeting, where you met with other people in your business or profession. They provided earphones with translators and had a main speaker in your business from someplace out there in the world. The year I was there and heard it, it was a dentist from England who told us about the good and the bad of their socialized, government-controlled medical and dental practice. Now for the more recent members, probably this would be helpful. Being a member of our Rotary Club presents you an opportunity to visit other clubs, meetings, luncheons, wherever you travel. You'll be welcome and can find the meeting most interesting. In 1959, I attended one in Honolulu, Hawaii, and missed the most interesting meeting by 1 week. As soon as I was seated and introduced myself at the table, one of the members said, "Oh my gosh, our program fell through. They're dragging out that 16 projector and a dull Rotary International film that we can all sleep through." We used to do the same thing, and some of you will remember that. Then he said, "You should have been here last week." When we arrived, they put us on tour buses and took us to our international airport, and we boarded the first 747 Airbus to land at our airport. And the speaker of the day was none other than the Charles Lindbergh, who was the president of Pan Am at the time, and he told us all about this big, fantastic airplane as we ate lunch and flew over each of the outer islands. The name Charles Lindbergh may not mean too much to many here today, but to my generation, he was one of our most famous heroes. He was the lone eagle who first to fly from the United States over the Atlantic Ocean to Europe alone. What a memorable program that would have been, and what a stir for Muskogee when in November of that year, October of that year, he flew into the Hatbox Field to visit Lieutenant A.C. Strickland, who was the operator of Hatbox at that time, the man who had taught Charles Lindbergh how to fly. We used to have family picnics at Outer Hyde Parks, where we had all kinds of games for children, adults, horseshoes and softball and gunny sack. And the older guys, even as old as 60 years old, always participated. I have a vivid memory of Joel Cousins' dad, Floyd Cousins, and our town historian getting out of character, that was Dub West, bouncing across the lawn of Honor Heights with gunny sacks pulled up to their waists. Now, in addition to the big district meeting we had in 1922, we also hosted some very well-attended district conferences in 1950, 1966, and 1972 that required a lot of work from all of us. In 1972, Judge Carl Robinson was our president, and Coleman Pike was our very efficient convention chairman. In 1963, we had our 50th anniversary banquet at Western Hills Lodge, and our president, Paul Berry Jr., a childhood friend of mine, had a dance band rather than a speaker after our banquet dinner. The younger members, who we were in the minority, loved it. Sandy and I got up and jitterbugged with the others to their version of Tommy Dorsey's Boogie Woogie, and we danced cheek to cheek when they played those great World War II songs that we'd all fallen in love with. We danced the night away while the older members watched, stretched, yawned, and left early. The younger ones who could get all-night babysitters spent the night there. In 1986, our club did something significant when we all-male club went co-ed. When Janie Boydson became our first female member, and what a unique character we got for that first one. Janie, she has proved to be an excellent choice, paving the way for many other hard-working female members. She was our first elected president in 1997, and you continue to serve very well, and now is our very feisty sergeant at arms. She was also our co-chairman of the 2013 Centennial events and banquet organizer. Now, to be historically honest, Rotary International mandate that we could no longer remain an all-male club organization was not enthusiastically received by some of our male members. I can remember the table talk. We've always been a male organization. They have their clubs. It will change our club forever. They were right. It did change our club a lot in many ways. I think it made us so much better and certainly so much prettier. In 1988, President Richard Hoagland and his wife Connie arranged a great banquet at the country club, I remember it well, to celebrate our 75th anniversary with Governor Henry Bellman as our speaker, and we're honored to have Richard Hoagland with us today. Richard, thank you for coming. Will Beckman and I were close, but Daniel Miller holds the distinction of being the youngest president we ever elected at age 29, and from the records I have, I believe Will Beckman was the only former member of our club ever to become a district governor. So far as I know, Carl Robinson and I were the only two members to become our club president without being nominated by a nominating committee. Carl was a write-in on the ballot and elected by the membership. I was asked by the board to replace President-elect and my brother-in-law, Warren McManus, who suffered a severe and crippling heart attack just a week or so before the election, and that's when I became the president-elect for Dr. D.H. Miller. In 1999, Brett Smith made history by being the only two-term president recorded and part of the only mother-son team recorded with his mother, Dr. Marlene Smith. Are they here? I don't think so, okay. Now, to be sure we're not just an eat and meet club, I will quickly list a few of the main fundraisers that kept us busy in the early days. Ed Rudress put together our largest and longest running money maker from bringing money from the outside in the 1950s with our annual Pancake Day. It was held a week or before Christmas at our City Hall Auditorium at 3rd and Muskogee, beginning in 1954 when everybody shopped downtown. The stores were packed and the sidewalks were crowded, and most looked forward to eating our pancakes and sausage, all you can eat for 60 cents. And the best thing about it is we had close to 100% participation working in shifts, and we were busy all day. Ed Bedras would not take no for an answer when he asked you to put you on a shift somewhere. Subsequently, we've had auctions, antique shows, garage sales. We organized the first Azalea Honor Heights run, with it being a 10K in the beginning, and we ran it for several years. It is now one of the state's biggest 5K draws. One of the more interesting fundraisers that I can remember was the year we had a gun and knife show. I remember it so well because the club president, our city attorney, Steve Caparis, and I were working the door and just about had to see how fast we could run or fight when a big, unhappy, bearded guy with tattoos, beards, and earrings took very serious issue with us on where his display was to show his swords and his knives and guns. And he said it was our fault and we'd better do something about it, and we did. I remember one of the largest joint efforts taken on by our club was to spearhead the fundraising drive and construction of our new YMYWCA. In 1955 to 60, we were to raise enough money to match the funds willed for that project from the Sondheimer estate. Mr. and Ms. Sondheimer were very popular, attractive, prominent early day merchants. Tragically, they were both killed when their tour bus went over a cliff while touring Europe. Our Rotary Club was the largest contributor. The building still stands and is well used. One of the jobs I had was to work with plaques and get them over the doors of each of the rooms in the building. And the last time I was in the building, our big Rotary plaque was still over the largest room in the building. In 1992, our club president, now our mayor, Bob Coburn, presented a check for $8,000 to our park department to help get the Honor Heights Garden of Lights going. It's now one of our state's most beautiful and popular tourist attractions. We are fortunate to have David Jones do so many things so well for our club, and the guy that keeps our Rotary Sponsors Beach Tournament going. It dates back to the 1940s, and when I started judging in the 1950s, it was called the International, and it was the most participated high school speech tournament in the United States. There were over 500 contestants that year and for several years after that, some from 4 adjoining states. In 1953, Houston's Mayor Hall Fines, who is credited with the planning and the construction of what was said then to be the 8th wonder of the world, the Houston Astrodome, accompanied over 100 contestants from his Bel Air High School, and he spoke to the Rotary Club when he was here. Since it was our tournament, we did provide all the judges the trophies and made a big deal out of trophy presentations. Now, the places we have had our noon luncheon after we left the Seavers Hotel, I think, are interesting. We met at the big game room of the Y for quite a while, and then the new Holiday Inn on Highway 69, Jasper's Annex on 17th Street in Muskogee, the First Presbyterian Church, and the Muskogee Country Club. Now, from the information I have, I believe Darrell Ward, Ed Gage, and Kent Herringshaw are the only members of our club to ever go to an undeveloped country when they went to Nicaragua to assist the natives to provide clean water. Are they here? Wait, one of them, okay. Early in the year 2010, our club president, Melinda Murphy, called and asked if I would work with a committee and Janie Boyds to begin the planning of something special to commemorate our club's 100 years in Muskogee, which would be coming up in 2013. Speaking of Melinda Murphy, I don't remember anyone doing as much for our club and community as she did in the time she was a member of our club. I don't know all that she did, but I do remember her working and organizing with those other go-getters, Nita and Renee, on the Party in the Park, the Choices program for students, Meals for the Homeless, and the Mission with Larry, updating our bylaws and foundation, and so much more. And I'm sorry that Melinda couldn't be with us today. I was in contact with her this morning. In 2013, we celebrated our 100th anniversary by providing the city with a 4-phase Victorian clock, and the dedication of the clock and our banquet went off so well because of the generation of so many of you. The funding of the clock was all club supported, and the success of the band, but because of the planning and good work of co-chairman Janie Boyston. And special recognition to our Centennial Club president, Joel Cousins, who had a very challenging year that year with a new secretary and doing such a great job presiding at the banquet and the Centennial Luncheon event. I feel blessed that I have been a member of the Muskogee Rotary Club for so long, especially when I thought for so many years I was destined to be a member of the Muskogee Kiwanis Club. I grew up in the Muskogee Kiwanis Club, seated next to my dad as a teenager. He was a very active, long-time member in his early years and became its president in 1944. My father-in-law was a Rotarian. My wife has 2 sisters whose husband graduated from dental school, and when they went to their hometown, they became Kiwanians. My dad, who had been active for a number of years, even before I returned from college, one evening, about 2 months after I'd become a Rotarian, asked me why I hadn't joined the Rotary Club, and I simply said I hadn't been asked. We've had some great projects, helped a lot of people along the way, some good causes, but I think we can all agree that one of the best things about being a member of our Rotary Club is getting to know that remarkable person seated next to you, or that you may have worked with on the last project that you may have never known otherwise. Like you, they were handpicked, highly respected in their field. They're a winner and a survivor. I've known a lot of them, and treasure your friendship and the memories of those no longer with us. To make a point, let me close by telling you about one of them. His name was Rotarian Bob Hine. He was also the manager of our new Holiday Inn on Highway 69, where we met at the Rotary Noon Luncheon for many years. Most of the time, he was much too busy to sit and eat with us, being sure the buffet and everything was going okay. But on this particular day, he happened to sit with us, and he sat at the table where I was. Someone happened to mention something about World War II, and it so happened that we were all seated at that table, had been veterans of that. And we took turns kind of going around the table telling what we did in our participation during the war. And I'm sure we embellished our part a little bit. But when it got around to Bob, he didn't say anything. So after a few minutes, one of our group said, "Bob, don't tell us you were sitting around in one of these motel swimming pools while we were out running that war." I remember Bob smiling. And he was silent for just a few minutes. And then he said, "I do remember, I did sit out most of the war, but not in a nice motel, as I was a prisoner of war in a Japanese prison camp. And if you want to know more about it, you might want to read the book, Four Came Home." It's in our library. It is about General Doolittle air raid and the 8 of us that were captured in 1942. General Jimmy Doolittle was the officer who trained the pilots and the first off the aircraft carrier on the day of that raid. He then told us he was a co-pilot in one of the 16 B-25s that took off the deck of the aircraft carrier Hornet in April of 1942 and brought the war to Japan by bombing their capital, Tokyo. His plane went down in Japanese occupied territory. Bob and 7 others were captured. 3 of them were put on their knees and executed by being shot in the head pretty quickly. 1 died later in captivity. Bob and 3 others survived 3 years and 3 months of captivity. When the atom bombs were used and Japan surrendered and occupation forces moved in, and they were found, every word in the United States, every paper in the United States headlines in bold print said, "Doolittle Flowers found alive." I remember seeing that as vividly as if I'd seen it in the morning paper. It's an amazing story of survival of a fellow Rotarian. My main point is this: sometimes getting to know that person next to you or that's here today is the most rewarding part of all. Several years ago, I saw a replay of a TV interview of another one of my aviation World War II heroes, the General Jimmy Doolittle. He not only led the flight that bombed Tokyo, but contributed a lot of things and pioneered a lot of things in the field of avionics and engineering. And those of us who have flown airplanes or have just ridden in airplanes can be thankful for the work he did in the development of instrument flight. In fact, he was one of the first, if not the first, to fly under the hood or blind fly. That is to take a plane off without looking outside and bringing it back to the field and putting it on the ground without being able to look outside. But anyway, at the end of the interview, he was asked how he would like to be remembered. And he simply said, after hesitation a few minutes, "I just hope that some of the things I did while I was on this earth for a while will leave my space and maybe some of our world a better place than when I first appeared." Individually, as Rotarians, you and I could not have made much of a dent in the needs of our community and certainly not our world. But working together with other members of our club, considering just some of the things we talked about in the past and looking out there today at those fresh younger members who will lead our club now in our future, I think we can all agree that our Muskogee Rotary Club will leave our space, and yes, part of our world, a much better place when we first appeared. And I believe what we've done our first 105 years is just the beginning. President-elect Blake, Rotarians and guests, until next time, that concludes my report. Thank you.